I guess we'll start out. This is actually the second half of our study of the Johannine Epistles, the letters of John. And trying to do a real quick review, I'm stepping back only a few slides from where we left off last time to try to get ourselves caught up to what we did. I guess it was 2 weeks ago, right? What we saw in there was that we took a look at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John under the assumption that they are all three being written by the same author. I think that's a fair assumption. We are pretty confident that it's not the same author who wrote the Gospel of John, but the Epistles of John, though, are coming out of that same community. They're addressing the continuing evolution, if you will, of their Christology, the way they see the person of Christ. We saw in John's Gospel, when we did a socio-historical approach, that in John's Gospel, the community probably started out with a simple human Christ vision that Jesus was the Son of God by a kind of adoption, if you will, that he was a man, a rabbi, Lamb of God, very much Aramaic terms that we would usually associate from a Jewish Jesus in the early life of the church. And that as time evolved and the Jewish Christians became more and more isolated from the temple and from the Jewish synagogue, Christianity began to focus on Christ more as a divine revelation of God. And we see in John's Gospel eventually that the Christology reaches a point where God and Jesus are co-equal, if you will, in their divinity, while Jesus is still human. Now we are seeing, by the time we get into the letters of John, that part of the problem that the church is addressing with these separatists, these cessationists, these people that the elder John, who writes these letters, is referring to as liars and antichrists. It turns out that, from what we can tell within the internal context of the letter, that these persons that are separating themselves from the church are believers in that Jesus is purely divine with no human about him. He only appeared to be human. He really wasn't human. A doctrine we call docetism. It comes from the Greek word dokeo, meaning to seem, and that Jesus only appeared to be human. He was not human. This poses all sorts of problems for the Johannine community, the community of John, if Jesus is not human. Yes, they maintain that Jesus is divine, but they're maintaining his simultaneous human and divine nature in one. Whereas the people that 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are criticizing as separatists, as cessationists, are people who maintain only the divinity of Jesus, not the humanity. Makes sense? Okay, so this is where we're going to pick up as just a quick transition into the rest of the material that we didn't yet get to finish the last time. The charges which the author levels against the cessationists do not pertain exclusively to their Christology. It also applies to their, or pertains to their moral accusations that are taking place. Because if, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. The way they're going to criticize the morality or the lack of morality of these cessationists is that if they are focused only on the divinity of Christ, not his humanity, then they're probably not focused on the physicality, the corporeality, the bodily form of themselves as well. That, you know, whatever happens in the body has no effect on their salvation. It has no effect on their spirit, their divine spark. So they can ignore some of the basic commandments of Christ to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, because those things don't matter. Make sense? Yeah, maybe? Okay. Well, this is what the author tells us about these cessationists with regard to ethics, not just their Christology, though I do think the Christology is related to their ethics. Do not, he accuses them in a way that they do not practice the commandments of God. For example, here in 1 John 2:4, whoever says, I have come to know him, but does not obey his commandments, is a liar. And in such a person, the truth does not exist. Okay. Now, the commandment, the great commandment, of course, given by Christ to the disciples in John's Gospel, and apparently is a prominent commandment that permeates in the community here, the Johannine community, is love one another even as I have loved you. Okay. They fail to love brothers and sisters in the community. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Okay. Again, talking about the physicality of your brothers and sisters, you've got to love them if you can see them, touch them, sensately or corporeally experience them. Okay. Apparently the cessationists do not see a need to love their brothers and sisters, at least according to the accusations made by John here in this letter. Make sense? That's another characteristic that he's criticizing. These cessationists apparently practice sin while claiming to have no contact with sin. Because what we know about this particular group, and we're going to show you who we think they are, these cessationists, after the fact, but they claim not to be subject to sin or tainted by sin because they're not bodily, and sin only affects the body. Okay? Does that make sense? If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. You hear me say that every Sunday, and I'm simply quoting Scripture, but John says it about these cessationists, these separatists, these antichrists, these liars, as he calls them, that have separated themselves from the original Johannine community. Okay. If these cessationists undervalue the corporeal existence of Jesus, perhaps they undervalue the importance of their own corporeal existence as well. Okay. If what really matters to them was the spirit rather than the flesh, then perhaps they were unconcerned not only about Jesus' physical existence, but also about the physical well-being of others and themselves. This is exactly what we think is going on here in the writings of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Okay?
So do they think, I'm still confused, I guess.
Okay.
So do they think that it doesn't matter what the body does? Mm-hmm. It's the spirit?
Yes. There are some groups of this particular heresy that we're going to be identifying in a moment that believe exactly what you're saying. Okay. That's correct. They believe that what happens in the body doesn't matter because the body and the spirit are in a kind of duality that they can't touch each other. And that so you can do whatever you want to with the flesh. It's not going to affect what you truly are, and that is spirit. Make sense? Okay. This would explain why the author stresses in his letter the need to continue to practice God's commandments and to love one another, unlike those who have left the community. Okay. Now, that's where we left off last time. Now we're going to jump into a new section. We're going to reflect on the contextual method that we've now applied to John's gospel, to John's epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Okay. Once we do these reflections, then we begin to get a clearer picture, retrospectively, of who these cessationists are. Okay. Let's take a look at it. As most every scholar will acknowledge, it is very tricky business to learn what people say and do on the basis of what their enemies say about them. And clearly the author of the Johannine epistles regards the cessationists as enemies of his community. So it is true that it's we always want to be cautious when we say things like, well, we understand what these cessationists believe, we understand what they do, because all we have about what they say and do is from from John's perspective, from the writer of the epistles. Okay, and what your enemies say about you aren't always the most reliable source of information about who you really are. Right? I would hate to think that people judge me based on what those who don't like me say about me. You know, that's who does, right? That's exactly what is part of the problem. That said, however, what then do we really know about the Johannine cessationists, those who left the community? Do we know for a fact that they were Docetists who taught others to disobey the commandments and to live in sin? Do we know that? The answer straight up is probably not no. We don't really know that. Okay? But what we can say is that from the author's point of view, a group of former members of the Johannine community had split to form their own group. That we know is true. We know what his opinion is, and that's what we have to work with. We can't say we know definitively what these cessationists are or who they are. What we can say is what John believes they are and who they are. Make sense? Okay. They taught that Jesus was divine but was not a real human being. That's what John believes. Okay. They saw no need to keep the commandments and did not manifest love for other members of the community. Okay. If this is the context as seen through the eyes of the elder, the writer of these letters, what more can we say about the historical occasion of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? Okay. 1st John is a treatise. Okay. It's not a letter. We've already identified that early on. Though we call it a letter, as far as genre or style of literature, it is not technically a letter. It is a treatise. Okay. It is a treatise to those in a neighboring church who have not joined the cessationists, written as a kind of open letter to persuade them to remain faithful to the author's position and to see it as as standing in true conformity with traditions which they inherited when they joined the community, the Johannine community, the Church of John. Okay? He's trying to say to their sister churches, the ones he referred to as the elect lady and her children, if you remember in in 2nd John, he's trying to say to them, don't give in to these cessationists. Don't believe what they're saying. That's not what the community believed from the start, and that is not what we believe now. So don't give in to them. Make sense? Okay. All right. 2nd John is a personal letter, probably to that same neighboring church, urging in short fashion much the same advice found in 1st John. 3rd John is a private letter to an individual, his name is Gaius, probably in that same neighboring church, giving instruction about a particular aspect of the problem associated with the issues addressed in 1st John. Okay? Now, beyond the Johannine community, the rise of Christian Gnosticism. Now we're going to, now that we've examined the letters of John, now we're going to take a little historical excursus. We know a particular group of Christians, or a Christian sect, if you will, a Christian today we would call them a Christian heretical group, that arose in the 2nd century. Remember, John's letters are being written right at the turn of the 1st century into the 2nd century. All right? So what we think may be happening, if we take a look at how these antichrists, these liars, these cessationists, these separatists are being described by John the Elder, and look back at what we know about some groups that fit that description, there is a group that fits that description that we know of. Gnostics. And so let's take a look at Christian Gnosticism and its rise. Okay? That is a religious movement that's occurring about this time. Make sense? Okay. Introduction. Gnosticism. Many of the charges which the elder leveled against the cessationists have reminded scholars of the beliefs of an early Christian group known as the Gnostics. The Gnostics, it's a group of religions which maintained that spiritual beings were entrapped in the material world by an evil God and could only be saved through secret knowledge imparted by the good God, Christ, which is what they believe he does, that Christ doesn't come in physical form. He is God who comes down to us, appearing to be human, but he's God, he's divine, And he comes to reveal these divine secrets, the secret knowledge that he needs to impart to Christians, to people who are smart enough to understand the secrets, and therefore learn how to liberate their spirit from being trapped in these shells of flesh. Because the flesh is evil, but spirit is good. Make sense? Which is what you truly are according to these cessationists, according to the Gnostics. Okay.
And were these Gnostics, they were not Jewish, were they? They were Gentiles?
There were some Jewish Gnostics. There were some Gentile Gnostics. Yeah. Most of them are Gentile. That is true. Because it's actually an offshoot, if you will, from Platonism. The idea that physicality is real, but somehow or other less real than the realm of forms or ideas. That's Plato. For example, the table in front of you, that coffee table, is real, but it's less real than the idea of the table. The idea of the table is eternal and never changes. That table will change and will fall apart, and anything that can change is not truly knowable because it doesn't participate in real existence. Real existence has got to be eternal. So the idea of the table will never disappear. Does that make sense? And think about it this way. What is it that makes that a table and this a table and any other table that you've seen in the world? They all look different, and yet we all call it table. According to Plato, we call it a table because it conforms to the idea of the table. So in effect, these things are just copies of the real table which exists in the realm of forms or ideas. So ideas are real. The things we build with our hands are just copies of those ideas, and therefore less real. Make sense? And everything in the universe is that way, according to Plato. Every human being is different, and yet we can look at people and tell they're human, right? Well, how is it if you look at someone you've never seen before, how do you know they're human? You've never seen that person before, right? You know they're human because they conform, they participate in humanness, the form of humanity that everybody's aware of. Make sense? That's what the form of humanity is what's real, not the human being. Well, the human being's real, but less real. It's like a shadow figure. The physical world is sort of like shadowy projections of reality, is what Plato believes. Now, you can begin to see from that type of philosophy how it is that kind of metaphysics, that kind of epistemology, looks very appealing to people who want to talk about the human flesh as being corrupt or unreal, but the human spirit, which is unseen, is more real. Does that make sense? It's just a real quick step from one to the other. Okay. These groups are called Gnostics because of their fundamental notion that gnosis, that's the Greek word for it, the Greek word for knowledge, was necessary for salvation. Okay, and I'm giving this to you. There's the Greek word right there. It's the Greek word for knowledge. Now, strangely enough, we would say gnosis. We usually don't, in English, pronounce the G and the N together. But in Greek, you can. It'd be gnosis in Greek. That's how you would say it, gnosis. You can say it, gnosis. You can say that in Greek. That's okay. There are some languages that will do this. For example, we do in English in a certain way say that, like in the word diagnosis. The G and the N are together, which is exactly which is coming from the word gnosis. A diagnosis means to have knowledge through something or towards something. Gnosis, diagnosis. You can hear the G and the N said together there. Or say it again, please. Diagnosis, or for example, if you're going to make a prediction of something that you don't really know, but you're projecting a knowledge, you call that a prognosis. You hear the G and the N said together. Prognosis, okay? So in Greek, you can do the gnosis sound. We usually don't do it in English. In English, we would simply say gnosis. We don't say gnome, those little yard things. We say gnome. But in Greek, you'd say gnomes.
We say gnocchi for potato pasta.
Say what now?
Gnocchi for potato pasta. It's got a G in front of it.
Oh, how does that? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All
I
right.
don't know where that comes from.
Okay. Could be a Greek root. Really could be. The Gospel of John enjoyed particular success among many Gnostic groups, including the cessationists from the Johannine community, because there are certain ways you could read John's Gospel from a Gnostic perspective, though it is obviously not a Gnostic Gospel. Okay, that's an introduction. Now let's get into some more details about who these Gnostics are. The problems of definitions, sources, and dating. Okay. Scholars debate over how to define Gnosticism, and the reason they have a difficulty with it is that there are different ways that Gnosticism was practiced. Okay, you identified one particular way, which said that some believed that because the body is not connected to the spirit, that whatever you did in the body didn't matter. So there were some who were just lascivious people who had no problems with doing things that we would consider a violation of the body, because drunkenness, gluttony, sexual immorality, things like that did not matter. You could engage in all of that and it wouldn't hurt your spirit. Okay, that some Gnostics believed that. There were other Gnostics who believed the exact opposite, that there was no reason to appeal to the appetites of the flesh because the flesh is not real, and so they would practice a form of austere asceticism. Does that make sense? You could go in either direction with Gnosticism in this way. Okay. Until about 100 years ago, our only sources for understanding Gnosticism were the writings of most vocal opponents, the proto-Orthodox church fathers of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. Justin Martyr, for example, criticized the Gnostics. We know about the Gnostics because of his writings. We know about them because of the writings of Irenaeus. We know about the Gnostics from the writings of Tertullian, all of whom are 2nd and 3rd century, the ones I just named are 2nd and 3rd century theologians. Okay? We have their writings. We know who the Gnostics were based on what they said. Of course, keep in mind, it's what I said before, we don't know firsthand knowledge of who the Gnostics are from what they said. We do now. But for the longest time, we didn't, because we didn't have any of their sources. All we had were what the proto-Orthodox church fathers and theologians were saying. Okay? But one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century is the Nag Hammadi Library. It provides us with an entirely new source of information about Gnostics, a source penned by Gnostic believers themselves. The best way to understand who the Gnostics are, read what the Gnostics say about themselves. We found a library of Gnostic Gospels, Gnostic writings. Nag Hammadi is a village in southern Egypt near a place where a collection of Gnostic writings were discovered in 1945. This is a wonderful find because this is the first time in history we actually have copies of Gnostic writings. And now we know who the Gnostics are, penned by the Gnostics themselves. Make sense? And lo and behold, much of the criticism was correct. Among the most interesting of these texts are the other Gospels about Jesus, and there are some Gnostic Gospels. Among these Gnostic texts is one allegedly written by a disciple Philip, another by Jesus' twin brother Thomas, and a third called the Gospel of Truth. Okay. By the way,
Twin brother?
yes. By tradition, yes. Now, don't read too much into that. Okay. All right. The Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth. By the way, there are other Gnostic Gospels than these, and we have copies of them. In fact, we know that others existed because that Irenaeus mentioned them in his writings against the Gnostics. He named some of them, and what's interesting is he actually named one, the Gospel of Judas, and he describes what's in it. But we never had a copy of the Gospel of Judas until a few decades ago. A copy was discovered, and it is amazing. So, in effect, it's fun to find these things. that have been lost in antiquity for the longest time, and realize this is the document that Irenaeus was talking about 2,000 years ago. So it's sometimes it's just scholars just have a field day when they discover that some of the things that they wanted to find, that these proto-Orthodox theologians were talking about, when they actually find the documents they're referring to. This is why I still harbor hopes maybe someday we'll find the Q source. We hypothesize that it exists, but it would be great if we actually found a copy. And who knows, maybe someday we will. There's always that hope. Okay. Although it is difficult to know exactly how to go about interpreting these writings, there are some essential tenets of Gnosticism which appear to underlie the various Christian Gnostic religions. We're going to talk about those, and here they are. I'm about to give you some of the tenets of Gnosticism. These are the things we know that are universally true, generally universally true of the Gnostics. How do they view the world? They believe in a kind of metaphysical dualism. Metaphysics is a fancy word meaning the the philosophy about reality. What is real? What's the nature of reality? Okay, that's the discipline in philosophy that addresses reality we call metaphysics. Okay, they believed in a form of metaphysical dualism, meaning that there were two things, two different kinds of substances, or two different types of essences that made up reality. Okay, the Gnostics understood the world in radically dualistic terms. Okay, reality was divided into two fundamental components. Okay, matter and spirit. These are the only two things in the universe, and everything in the universe is derived either from matter or spirit, and they don't cross each other. There's all different forms of matter, all different forms of spirit, and this is what reality is comprised of. Make sense? Now, many people will probably think, well, yeah, that's true. There are many people today who are metaphysical dualists in the way we live our lives. A lot of people think they think of the soul as being immortal and eternal and non-physical, and they think of their bodies as being physical, corporeal, limited, temporal, right? So human beings, even today, sometimes practice or act like a form of metaphysical dualism is at play in the world. There was a time in physics when physics actually, the people who study reality, and scientists who study reality we call physicists, and these physicists had sort of a dualistic view of the universe, matter and energy. The universe is either matter or energy. Then comes along someone like Albert Einstein, who gives us E equals mc squared, which basically is a matter-energy equivalence. It's basically saying that energy and mass, energy and matter, are exactly the same thing, just in different ratios and proportions. You congeal or solidify or compress enough energy, it becomes matter. And if you energize, or if you trigger matter just right, it becomes energy, like the atomic bomb. Okay, or going the other direction from energy into matter, which is what comes about from the Big Bang. The idea that the universe is just a hot mess at the start, and then eventually it starts cooling down and everything solidifies into matter. Okay, matter is sort of energy frozen. Does that make sense? But it's the same thing, according to Albert Einstein. Matter and energy are exactly the same. So even of late, even modern science thought in dualistic terms. But the Gnostics believe that the only thing that's real is matter and spirit. Okay. The Gnostics believed that the material and spiritual worlds were at odds with each other. That's why they are. It's very radical the way they look at it. That the material world was evil and that the spiritual world was good. So note, not only is the world metaphysically dualistic, but it's ethically or morally dualistic as well. Okay, because it just so happens that the material world, they're assigning a moral value, evil. Spirit world, they are describing with moral values, good. Okay, So, matter, spirit, evil, good. As far as the Gnostics were concerned, it's the same thing. Okay? The battle between matter, evil, and spirit, good, was not eternal. The material had not always existed, whereas spirit always does. Spirit is eternal, matter is not, according to the Gnostics. According to the Gnostics, the creation of the material world was the result of a cosmic catastrophe. It was an accident, or it was the result of the act of an evil God. Okay? The true God, the author of good, could not have created something as evil as as miserable as the material world, according to the Gnostics. The material existence is miserable. Okay? Why? Because it decays. I mean, look at human beings. We're born, that's good news, but we get old and we die. All right? What's the point in that, according to the Gnostics? Okay? The material world decays. That coffee table may look beautiful now, well polished, but there will be a day when it is not beautiful, and there is a day when it will not exist. It will go out of existence someday. And the reason I can say that with confidence is that there have been lots of coffee tables in the world, and we're not overrun with coffee tables. Somewhere, old coffee tables have disappeared. They have decayed, they've corrupted, they've gone away. We've torn them up, thrown them in the trash, thrown them in a fire pit. Something's going to happen to that coffee table someday. It won't last forever. This is what the Gnostics are saying about the material world. That's what they believe about the world. That's their metaphysical dualism. About the divine realm, what do they believe? The Gnostics believe that there is an unknowable God. God is unknowable. According to the Gnostics, God is a good, eternal spirit. I wonder how they know that. This God produced offspring, one of whom is called Sophia. From the Greek, and by the way, the woman's name, Sophia, comes from this. It's a Greek word, Sophia. That's exactly how you pronounce it, Sophia. Sophia. It's the Greek word for wisdom. Joel's daughter's name is derived from this. Sophie, her name means wisdom. Okay. Maybe so. We hope. We hope. Okay. Sophia is entrapped. She is entrapped by other offspring within the material world in human bodies. Sophia. In Gnosticism, she is a female offspring of the eternal good God spirit. She is entrapped within human bodies and is trying to return to the divine realm. That's you and me. That's us. We are divine. We are that divine spirit. We are all part of Sophia, part of divine wisdom, trapped in these shells of flesh. Okay? According to the Gnostics. Now, the human race. I'll show you how all this connects. What do they believe about the human race? Their anthropology. What is their belief about human beings or human nature? The divine spark. The Sophia, the divine spark, resides in only the elect few humans, those who are aware of it. A lot of human beings go by in life and don't realize there's anything special about them. They're just bohemians. They're just morons. Which is another Greek word, by the way. Sophia means wisdom. Moria means foolishness in the Greek. We get the word moron from that. And we get the word sophisticated from the word Sophia. We get the word sophomore. Sophomore is two Greek words. It literally means wise fool. You see it? Sophomore, Sophia, Moria, wise fool, or sophisticated moron. That's what a sophomore is. Okay? Sophia, the divine spark, resides in only the elect few humans who are smart enough, wise enough to know that about themselves. You can begin to see that this is a religion that appeals to the intellectual elite. Make sense? Okay. It's a religion of exclusivity, a religion of elitism. These humans feel alienated in this material world because the spirit within them seeks to be liberated from their material prison and to return to their spiritual home. So if you feel like somehow that you're alienated in this world, that you don't belong in this world, that's right, you don't, according to the Gnostics. That's Sophia within you speaking, telling you you're more than this body. Okay? Salvation. How does salvation work for the Gnostics? Okay. Liberating knowledge. Note, Gnostics do not talk about faith, they talk about knowledge. Okay? It's knowledge which saves you, not faith, which the proto-Orthodox Christians were saying. All right? The Gnostics the Gnostics claimed that a person could be saved from the material world only by acquiring the proper gnosis, the proper knowledge. Okay? This knowledge is, of course, only for those destined for salvation. It's only those who are the elect, the few who recognize within themselves that they have this divine spark. They're the only ones who are prone to receive and understand and utilize this secret knowledge. Make sense? This saving knowledge must come from outside the material world, because we can't gain it in the material world. The material world is evil, so we're not going to find it here in this world. Not these secrets, this great secret of salvation. We're not going to find this secret knowledge in this world. It has to come from outside this world. Make sense? Okay, that's where Christ comes into the picture. The divine Redeemer. Okay, and note, divine Redeemer. There is nothing human about him, according to the Gnostics. Jesus can't participate in the physical reality because physical reality is evil, right? How can a good God, Jesus Christ, the divine being, participate in anything that is physical? He can't, without tainting himself, messing himself up with sin and evil. Make sense? So for the Gnostics, Jesus can't be a human being. He can only be divine and never be human. Okay? The divine emissary, Christ, who comes from the divine realm to reveal this secret knowledge, cannot be a human because that would make him part of the material realm. All right? Note what he does, though. He is a divine emissary. He is the God up here, this Christ, who comes down to us, and his purpose is to reveal the saving knowledge. That's where it comes from. If you want to know why Christ comes into the world according to the Gnostics, it's not to sacrifice himself for our salvation. It's not to die on the cross. He comes to bring secret knowledge. Make sense? That's why he comes into the world. Not to die on the cross. He comes to reveal secret knowledge, according to the Gnostics. Thus, Christ could not have a real flesh and blood body. Okay? Some Gnostics were docetic or docetists, believing that Christ only seemed to be human, but in reality was a divine being. Other Gnostics believed that the divine Christ entered the human Jesus and departed from him prior to his death. So there were different ways that Gnostics would explain how Jesus did what he did, or that how the Christ did what he did. The Christ is divine. Jesus happened to be some human being who was walking around. Okay? And what happens, according to some Gnostics, is that the divine Christ permeates or jumps into the body of this Jesus of Nazareth and sort of manipulates him like a puppet. Make sense? Okay, so poor Jesus, the carpenter from Nazareth, gets duped by being inspirited, being taken over by a divine being who takes control of him and makes him do all the things that the divine Christ wants him to do. Poor Jesus has no other choice but to be the host of this divine revelation that's unfolding. Okay, poor guy. What happens is Jesus. They know the stories of Jesus being crucified. I mean, they know the Gospels. The Gnostics did have a favor for John's Gospel. And so when John's Gospel, where Jesus is crucified, the way some Gnostics explain it is that the Christ who invaded the body, and snatched the body of this Jesus of Nazareth, ended up doing all sorts of things that got him arrested and crucified. And just as this Jesus was dying on the cross, the Christ jumps out of him, leaving Jesus to die on the cross. Poor guy. Being crucified for nothing that he did. It was all Christ, the Spirit Christ, doing this in him. Make sense? You're looking at me like I'm talking nonsense, but I promise you there were some Gnostic groups who believed this. Okay. Okay. Everyone all right so far? Okay. The Gnostics and the Johannine community. Now we're actually projecting back. We are assuming, based on not on biblical knowledge itself, it's implied by John's epistles. We can't draw this conclusion. We are now projecting into it what we know about history. If we assume, and that's what we're saying, if we're assuming that the cessationist groups that John is writing about in his epistles, in his letters, are the precursors or the forerunners of what will become what we know as the Gnostics, then this is what we can say about Gnostics and the Johannine community, the community of John. All right? There are certain similarities between some of these Gnostic views and those of some of the members of the Johannine community. Okay? Although we cannot assume that the cessationists consider themselves Gnostics, the similarities in their views are quite interesting, particularly with regard to Christology. The Christology that is being criticized of the cessationists in these 3 letters of John are very interestingly paralleling what we do know about the Christology of the Gnostics after the fact. Okay? It is true that most scholars, and I'm in this camp, I don't believe that these cessationists are full-blown Gnostics, but they certainly are what I would consider to be the forerunners of Gnosticism. They may be the forefathers, the founding fathers of what will become Gnosticism. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Indeed, in the Gospel of John, Christ is, in some sense, God himself. Okay. We know this. It's not the same as what the Gnostics are saying, but it's easy to see how the Gnostics are going to embrace the Gospel of John, because of all 4 of the Gospels, all 4 of the canonical Gospels in our New Testament. John's Gospel is the one that is most definitely, most clearly making the statement that Jesus Christ is God. And Christians make that claim today. But Christians do not deny the physicality, the corporeality, the incarnation of Jesus. They are not saying that... modern-day Christians will say that Jesus is simultaneously God and human at the same time. That sounds like metaphysical nonsense in many ways, and it probably is. Christians have never resolved that issue. They tried to in many councils. The Council of Ephesus, the Council of Nicaea, of Constantinople, of Ephesus, the Council of Chalcedon. In all 4 of those councils, they've striven to define exactly what it means to say that Jesus is both human and divine. And I'm not certain they do so effectively. It still sounds like metaphysical nonsense. They simply arrive at a definition, Chalcedonian definition, that there are certain things we can say about Jesus that apply to both his divinity and his humanity, but we can't confuse the natures. We simply accept the fact that we can't harmonize them, and we shouldn't try. We should simply accept the experience of Jesus as fully human and accept Jesus as fully divine in the way he reveals God to us. And that's all that modern Orthodox Christianity says. Gnostics recognize that John's Gospel is the one of the 4 Gospels that is most prominent in the way it describes Jesus as divine. So much so that the Gnostics love John's Gospel and find ways to explain the physicality, the corporeality of Jesus, because they're not going to believe in his physicality. But they are going to latch onto that aspect of John's Gospel which emphasizes Jesus' divinity. Make sense? And as I'm looking at it, I think that brings our study of John's Gospel to John's letters to a close. What do you think of all that? Was that too much?